I hope the panel comes up very soon. Yes, yes. So we're here this afternoon to talk about gender-based violence and social norms. Our panel is looking at how social norms drive inequality and discrimination against women and girls. We'll then narrow down into some of the inequalities, including disability and gender-based violence. We want to talk about or interrogate, so to speak, the influence of negative gendered social norms and cultural practices on how women and girls are viewed in society. So thank you for joining us. My name is Olufunke Baruwa, and I am the Program Officer for Gender, Racial and Ethnic Justice at the Ford Foundation Office for West Africa. I have here with me this fine gentleman and ladies who are going to be looking at this topic with me. First is, actually you'd see on the platform Dr. Abiola Akiode Afolabi, who couldn't make it, but is represented by her Director of Programs of the Women Advocates Research and Documentation Center, Emanuela Azu. Welcome, Emanuela.
Thank you very much.
We also have here David Ayele. David is the Executive Director of the Center for Citizens with Disabilities, CCD. David, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And last but not the least, Lola Vivo Adeniyi. Lola is the Director General of the Domestic and Sexual Violence Response Team, Lagos State, known as DSVRT. I know many of you know it as that. Lola, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So we want to quickly go into the topic. One of the reasons, and we had this conversation just before we started, that it's a good thing to have a conversation like this in such a forum where it's usually about fashion, technology, business, more of the fun things, you know. But it's also good that we begin to look at how the social sector, the interplay between this and the social sector. We cannot continue to talk about those things when we don't look at inequalities and how they affect us as humans. So this moderated panel session will look at how social norms drive inequality and discrimination against women and girls. We'll look at gender-based violence and social norms and drivers of inequality. It will help us interrogate the influence of negative and gendered social norms and cultural practices on how women and girls are viewed in the society. It would also help us create a space to discuss and develop an understanding of how culture itself, you know, religion, even colonial norms help to place women in subordinate positions. Because I talked to my grandmother before she died about 10 years ago, and I remember I asked her what was her maiden name, and she said, "What is maiden name?" I tried to say it in Yoruba, and she said there was nothing like that, that her name is her name. She's the daughter of this, so she was not a Mrs. anything. She was just a daughter of. So some of these things that we do are colonial, what would I call it now? Are colonial values that we imbibed, you know, that we inherited. And now women are looked at from that prism of who do you belong to or whose name do you bear. But she was just, so I just found out that her last name was not the same with my father's name. And her last name was her father's name. And it was not a problem, and she died at 108. So when did we change some of these things? How did colonial influences, religion, I don't want to say it's culture, because that was our culture. So it's religion. My first question then will be to Emanuela. And so from what I've said, what do you think are the underlying social and cultural norms that you have encountered in the course of your work? WADC, Women Advocates Research and Documentation Center, works with it's a feminist, women's rights-led organization. You've worked with groups for the last 20 years, if I recall.
Yes.
So what are and in the course of this work, what are some of the negative social and cultural norms that you've encountered, and how have you managed to navigate this to still be able to do your work collectively with women groups and as an organization, how have you navigated them? What are these influences? How have you navigated them? Thank you. Emanuela.
Yes, thank you very much. And once again, thank you for the opportunity to share our work. Okay, so Women Advocate What? See, over the years, like you said, we've worked particularly with women from various classes, ethnic groups, religion, different diversity. We've worked with women across all divides. And so one thing that has always stood out is that, like you mentioned, you rightly mentioned, when we talk about culture, culture is very diverse. And so one of the things that we have realized is that oftentimes when crimes are perpetrated, when there is a violation of a right, it's usually hinged under the ambit of culture and religion. So most times what people interpret as religious rights, religious nuances, religious behaviors are actually cultural beliefs that people actually mistake. Because so most of the time, you see people perpetrating a crime saying, oh, a woman should not be heard because in the Bible or because in the Quran. But these are patriarchal beliefs, these are cultural beliefs, and these are societal norms that has actually and continuously kept women behind. So for us, we actually found out that for us to be able to move forward, for us to be able to remove all these inequalities, diversities, and violations of rights, particularly of marginalized groups, women and young people, we have to interrogate the religious and the cultural space. It's very important because most of the things that happen, let's take a very practical example. You actually set the tone very well. One of the first culture shock I had growing up was I went to school in Benin and I got into the market and I saw women selling meat, which for me was a rude shock because I was born in Lagos. I grew up in Lagos. I lived my life going to see in the market, men actually dominate that trade. Men sell meat in the market. But then just how many kilometers within Nigeria, within the same region, southern Nigeria, I see the opposite. I see women selling meat. And you know, there is this stereotype that it's a trade that women are reserved for men. And then just how many kilometers within the same region, you see women practicing that same trade. So that's to show you that the violation and the inequalities that exist till today are man-made. And they are, when I say man-made, it's man-made, and I may call it cultural, and I may call it religious, because they intertwine. Most of the time, when you begin to dig deep, you find out that those, quote, cultural beliefs are actually religious beliefs that are infused into religion. So that's the intersection, that's the underlining factor that we really need to interrogate and see what we can do. And that's what we have been doing over the years. So one of the things that we have been doing as a group is engaging custodial traditional rulers and cultural gatekeepers. For instance, when we talk about Iyaolo days, within this southern Nigeria, southwest Nigeria in particular, they are also part of the religious setting, but they do not yield as much influence.
Emanuela, I want you to keep that thought because I don't want you to go there because there's a question around that. But I want David to talk about, I mean, David, you've worked in this field, you know, and one of the things you do is pushing for disability inclusion. And I wager that you also have some of those cultural norms and belief systems that sort of try to box persons with disability in a space. So what are they and how have you navigated them to still be able to do your work with CCD and to thrive, no, I don't want to use the word survive in this climate? Thank you, Manuela, and thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you so much. As you know, I acquired disability at the older age by reason of my visit to Freetown, Sierra Leone for business trip. So during the process, the rebel captured me and chopped off my 2 hands. So coming back to Nigeria to start life again, a new chapter without hands exposed me to what it means to be a person with disability. So immediately I was discharged from the hospital. I was about to move to the society. It began to manifest. that those who used to smile to me withdrew the smile. Those who used to come closer to me distanced me. I begin to understand what it means to suffer discrimination. I begin to appreciate stigma. I begin to appreciate isolation. Because of this experience, I changed city. I had to leave Aba, where I was raised. Where we stay, that's where we have our family house. To move to Lagos as just to see if I can get a breathing space so that I can have sanity by reason of my predicament. So what I'm trying to say is that when disability occur, the societal negative norms are activated against you. So the religious people will say, maybe it is because my grandfather was a native doctor, they want to punish us, so the third generation will suffer disability. Maybe it is because there are sacrifices our family failed to do in a bid to punish us. These are the things. As such, you are not expected to interface within the society. It is worst if you're a woman. So the woman, the family members can't even associate with their own with disability. So the society blocks you, you are cornered. So the pain, the agony, the psychological trauma widens. Even in the religious setting, you will not be given space. So it took me time, I just want to share my personal experience. It took me time for me to change environment in order for me to fit in, where people who don't know my background will remind me of where I'm coming from and why I suffer disability. So in order to see how we can bridge this, that is how we started CCD. In order to begin to tell the society, anybody can suffer disability. It has nothing to do with what you suffered or the sins of your father. Anything can happen. It could be medical, it could be road accident, it could be gunshot, it could be anything. You can even be at home and you suffer disability. So it has nothing to do with that. But the question is, why is this norm that we hold so strong still persist? It persists because there are, there are factors that feed into it. So in Nigeria, we believe in survival of the fittest. Am I correct? So they will tell you it's survival of the fittest. So by reason of your disability, you are not fitted. So you can't fit in. And I always say it, a society that believes and promotes survival of the fittest will continue to abuse the rights of the weak, will continue to exclude the marginalized population, will continue to abuse and perpetuate violence against the weak, in particular, women. If it's a person with disability, it widens because it is about survival of the what? Of the fittest. It is one value in Nigeria we need to, see how we can change that orientation. Everybody in Lagos wants to demonstrate that he fits in. So if you want to use the bus, you demonstrate you can jump in because you fit very well. So the bus cannot stop for you. So if you're a woman with disability, you can't even come. Even women will not protect you because you do not fit in. And you know the attitude of our people and attitude of our women, they first of all look at your clothes. This clothes fits you well. Because you're a woman with disability, it does not fit you. So you can't even come in. Even we are using a shebi, that shebi you will not be involved in wearing it. Even if you buy it to wear, you will not come to the front seat because it doesn't fit you. You are on crutches, you're on wheelchair. You will not see the beauty of that your clothes while you're on wheelchair. It's a long journey, but we'll get there.
Thank you very much, David. And I'm sure many of you may not have heard about David's story, but David and I have been on this journey almost 20 years now, if I recall. And it's interesting you mentioned acquired disability because there are two variations. There are those who were born with a disability, and there are those who acquire disability, whether as children or as adults. And that brings me to the question of how do we see those domains of disability? Because it's, in both instances, it's no one's fault. And of course, that then comes to the question I would like to ask, or for you to come in here, Lola. Because when it comes to gender-based violence, and this is an issue you have, this is an area you have great expertise in, it's a problem that when it happens, it's like it's your fault. What were you wearing? What were you doing? What were you doing there? What did you say? What did you not say? Disability, on the other hand, it's interesting to hear that people were even looking at your grandfather being a traditionalist. My grandmother was a priestess, so I don't know what she did that I'm suffering for. But for it to be seen as a punishment, something that was totally out of your control. War could happen anywhere. Rebels are everywhere. There are terrorists and bandits in Nigeria. Terrorists who attack, it's nobody's fault. How do you bring that into GBV, where the culture of shame, silence, and stigma make it the survivor or victim's fault?
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. So when we're dealing with sexual violence, we have what is referred to as the rape culture. And I think you've spoken a bit on that, where the attention, the spotlight is shifted from the alleged perpetrator and is placed on the survivor. And you have a scenario of Ada was raped instead of Ade raped Ada. And when it comes to domestic violence, there's so many norms, so many underlying factors that contribute to the perpetration of domestic violence. So where I work, on average, we see 10 cases daily, new cases. Last year, we started to do an average of 300 cases monthly. And we tried to do a research. We tried to analyze these cases. And we found out that at least 60% of the alleged abusers of domestic violence allegations that were made against men, we found out that at least 60% of them said that they had been exposed to violence. So this is what they saw growing up. This is what they witnessed. Whenever their parents were having issues, the next thing was for their father to bring out a belt and flog the mom, or to do silent treatment, or to eject her from the house and all of that. So basically, we are all products of our socialization. It is what we saw, what we witnessed growing up, and that informs our behavior in adulthood. So to address your question directly, I would say that we have this issue of this rape culture that vilifies survivors. In fact, I think in society there's a divide. There's half of society that, shows empathy, supports survivors, encourages survivors to speak their truth. And then we have another part of society that names and shames the survivor and gives excuses for the perpetrator. So that is there. And then for domestic violence, you have different considerations. Oh, there's the economy. People are stressed. People are, we're having issues with getting fuel or cash. And so the person has to vent. And then the next place he or she is venting is at home. So there are so many excuses are given, And when we do that, we shift the spotlight from the issue, and we don't address the person that is abusive, right? And then you now find out that you're just doing remedial. You're just responding. We're not preventing. And I think that's where we really need to get to as a society.
Thank you. I like where this ended. Because my next question is around, so who are those best suited? Who should we be talking to in society in terms of advocacy, policy shifts, laws to end the culture of violence and exclusion? Who should we be engaging? And what kind of structures, processes, and resources do we need to urgently put in place? Because this is a pandemic. I think in 2020 it was named the shadow pandemic. What urgent resources do we need? What urgent structures? What urgent processes? We know there are a lot of structures in existence. Yours is a very good example. We have the VAP law. But what do we need to do urgently? Anyone can take it.
Okay, so
And who are those best suited to lead that work?
look, I think for me, it's a collective. It's an action and it's a collective action for everyone. Everyone must be involved. That's the first one. And I think also, secondly, we need a mindset shift. We really need to move our mindset from what it already is. Like she said, we are all products of our socialization. So a lot of people need to move their mind, shift their mindset to be able to move beyond where they are, to be able to see things differently and act differently. And so when we talk about mindset shift, so there's a lot of entitlement mentality. Like there's a lot of impunity going on in the society. And until and except we shift and we move from these stereotypes, from this cage, would remain where we are. And so when I also said it's a collective, we need even the younger generation, the middle class, and then the older generation. But for us, interestingly and particularly at the moment, one of the things we are also working on and doing is engaging traditional gatekeepers. And when we say traditional gatekeepers, we mean particularly like the Iyalo days, the Iyalojas in the market, because, you know, when we talk about violence, it happens particularly in the homes, it also happens in the community. So when it exists in the community, like for instance, it happens along the road, in the market, in the garage, we have the Iyalojas. And you know, most times the markets is already, the garages in the markets are usually linked to the market. And then these Iyaloja people, they have a hold over the market, they are a voice, they are an influence in the market. And so they are able to make decisions and they are able to bring justice and bring sanity. So we're also working with them to see how we can curb that within the society. And then when we also talk about it in the home, you know, most times when there is a case of violation, we say report to the police. You go to the police, police tells you it's a family business, go back home. But then if we want to actually look at it, most traditional settings, most communities, they will first go to a religious leader or a traditional leader to lay the complaint even before they get to the police station. And so that's why we are saying, if you are able to bring together these Iyalode people, the wife of the Bale within the community, or the Iyaloja, and all of these women who have influence, they have influence, and they also have voice within the community. So from there, they are able to seek, so where they are victims of violence are able to seek redress from them, because we train them, we make them understand basic violations of rights. Because several things happen within the society, and people take it as a given, as a norm. They do not understand that, they do not see it as violation of the person's right. For instance, in the market square, a woman is passing and you hit her butt. It's a violation. And everybody, and then the woman turns and says, what's wrong with her? And they say, I beg they go, what's wrong with you? My wife is finer than you at home. But when the Iyaloja in the market understands that it's a violation, she's able to bring together all the men, all the women, everybody, because interestingly, when such things happen in the market, both the men and the women, they join in condemning the person who has been violated. And they say to her, I beg they go. You know, they say all sorts of demeaning things, and then there's a double violation, and the person is further violated. And so when we understand it, when we're able to catch them from this perspective, to a large extent. And another thing we're also trying to do is to see the traditional institutions, the ballets and all of that. That's why I'm also working with the wives of the ballets and all. So they have this regular sitting of the ballet, but then the Iyalode's influence and presence during this meeting, we want it to be as strong as the Otun of the ballet, because particularly for the Southwest, we want them to be able to give her a leverage to make decisions, to have a voice in the decision-making council of the traditional rulers. So when we work from that perspective, I think for us, we will be able to a very large extent, within the communities, curb violence, because the whole essence is to prevent violence as much as we can. Because the perpetrators live with us in the schools, at home, in the church, on the streets and all of that. So, and then also, we also work with other influencers within the community, youth leaders in the community. We also work with, because there are times you go into a community, because currently we work in 6 states, and then we are working in 6 communities per state. It's a gradual, we'll scale up. We started with 2 communities and we've scaled and we'll further scale up. And so what we are doing within these communities is we have what we refer to as the community response team. And what the community response team, what they do is they are a group of people within the community who have voice and who also have influence, who people respect, who people refer to, like when there is an issue, they easily go to them. So we train them to first and foremost identify basic violations of rights. Because 1,001 times there are violations and people do not realize those are violations. They are very salient, but they are violations of people's rights. Yes.
And often those are the violations that then lead
to the grave violations.
Itself.
Yes, the violations that we see within our community. So once we train them to identify this violation, and then they become like the community response team, they respond to this violation, they carry out outreach within their communities, and then so at the end of the day, we will begin to see drop in the level of crime and violations within the community. So that's why I said it's a collective. Because the politician there in the reps or in the assembly belong to a community, come from a community. So wherever you are, it's a police officer, they are in a community, they belong to a community. So it's a collective decision, it's a collective action for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emanuela. David, I know that one of the things that you've been pushing, for instance, is accessibility and inclusion. And who is responsible? Who should we be pushing? Government, of course, is supposed to be responsible for all these things, but we also need a push. We need somewhere or a structure that can actually get these things in place. When you travel outside Nigeria, a lot of these things are not rocket science. Coming into public buildings, for instance, a person with disability, how do they get immersed into the society? How do we ensure that it is a norm and not an exception?
Yeah. One thing we are trying to promote is behavioral change. When behavior is so deep, especially acquired behavior by reason of traditional or religious belief, it takes time for people to understand this is not how it's supposed to be. In particular, the attitude, because it is attitude that creates these barriers, which when we promote disability, we say we use what we call, social model, that if society are able to remove those barriers that hinders people from participating, then participation, inclusion becomes possible. So at the religious level, those preachings that they use as title, when a church wants to do crusade and they want to bring people, they will tell you the blind will see, the cripple will walk, that you are going to see miracle. They will even show you people who are not hearing before that are hearing. We want to change that by saying that it's not every person with disability that comes to church needs miracle. He or she wants to come to church for him to appreciate and interface with his maker and creator, thereby fulfilling his own personal faith, not necessarily because he needs miracle or he wants to be healed. At the community level, we are also saying that you have disability does not mean you cannot fit in. Let me tell you a case my attention was drawn in Abia State. So this particular individual in Abia State, it is his inheritance, it is their family that is going to produce the traditional ruler, and is hearing impaired. The governor gave him the title and gave him the mantle of leadership. And when the community discovered that he's a hearing impaired, they started protesting. That they're going to protest to the governor to recover the title from him and everything. And it was the interpreter, a state interpreter, that caught my attention that this is what they are going to do. And I said, the day they get to the governor's office, they should call my attention. And while we are doing that, this thing happened when we are struggling to secure a disability law in Abia State. And within that space, the governor signed the disability law. I said, we have gotten to what we are looking for. Let them try it and let's test the law. So what I'm trying to say is that within our traditional cultures, we want to, create space to remove that understanding that disability is a crime. And we also want to use successful individuals who are champions in their own right, people who had no disability and later in life and they are having disability, and the way they are managing it has been successful. By so doing, changing that orientation, that by reason of having disability, that your case is closed.
Thank you very much. Lola, on that, what are your thoughts? Structures, processes, resources, who is best suited?
Yes. So I think, as Emanuela said, it's indeed a collective effort. There's no one organization that can do it on its own. Or government, yes. So I think it's important for us to be strategic when we're looking at these issues. Let us map out what the issues are and then know where to channel our effort to. So if it's in terms of policies, legal framework, holding people accountable, of course, government comes top, government and NGOs. Provision of services, government, NGOs, preventing. I find that in this space of sexual and gender-based violence, we've not really tapped into the private sector. I feel there's a whole lot that the private sector can do. And why do I say this? Because where I work, at least 70% of the survivors that we engage are employed, right? And I know of a fact that if a person was beaten yesterday by her husband, and she has to go to work tomorrow, she will not be able to give her best. It will definitely affect her capacity to deliver on the job. And so, as a private organization, it's going to affect your bottom line because this employee of yours cannot deliver optimally. And you know, in the past 5, 6, 7 years, we've tried, perhaps because we're government, and people don't tend to really want to support government, and it's understandable. But I find that there's a bit of resistance from private sector to issues that pertain to sexual and gender-based violence. It's almost like they don't want to be associated with it, maybe because it's a blemish, you know. But I think the point is this. Sexual and gender-based violence is not a respecter of age, class, or creed. Indeed, it can happen to anybody. And as an institution, as a private organization, what measures are you putting in place to ensure that your employees are safe? Not just in your organization, but even at home, because ultimately it will affect their capacity to deliver on the job. So I think government, NGOs, private sector, and us, each and every one of you. You know, perhaps it's because of what I do. You attend a function that is for children, and the DJ is playing adult content, adult music, and you see parents cheering their children. These children know the lyrics. Some of the lyrics we don't even know. And they are singing it. And you see parents bringing out their phones and recording. And hardly you find that an adult goes to the DJ and says to the DJ, DJ, please do not play this song. They are swearing, they are cursing. You know, we always push it. Oh, it's the role of the government. It's the role of the school. It's the role of the church. What is your role as an individual? I think we need to come to that place where we all see ourselves as mandated reporters. Because the truth of the matter is that if you train your child and your child is fine, your child will have interaction with a child that may not be fine. And then you have that situation where that child influences your own child negatively. So I think we should all find ways in addressing this, especially maybe even from a selfish standpoint. Right? So let me do this so that my own children will be safe. And then every other institution should really rise up to the responsibility, because the truth of the matter is that people are dying as a result of sexual and gender-based violence.
Thank you very much. So finally, before we go to the audience, I am sure we can take at least 2 questions from the audience. How do we crack social norms change? I can see you all nodding because it's a difficult question to answer. So maybe we can also get responses from the floor. How do we crack social norms? We keep talking about it's a collective effort. We all need to come together, all hands on deck. But what lessons can you all share, you know, to keep the conversation going? I like the fact that when we started this, I don't think there has been any session like this in Africa Next since it has started. And it looks like we're out of place because, I mean, there are more fun things, like I said, fashion, tech, dance, you know, finance, digicoin, what's it called, cryptocurrency, and more interesting things. But everyone, 1 in 3 women are survivors or victims of gender-based violence, or will be. 1 in 10 children, even men. We now have increasing cases of men who are survivors or victims of GBV. But we also have a culture of shame and stigma that sort of even affects men more. You can't even say it out. And so there are damaged people everywhere who are engaging on all these super and interesting platforms, and maybe that's why we're not getting the kind of advancement we want in our country. Just a theory. So how do we crack social norms change? What lessons or next steps can you share to keep this kind of conversation going so that it is not restricted to NGOs, it is not restricted to DSVRT or NAPTIP at the federal level, or Ministry of Women's Affairs at the state level, or just women's rights organizations? Anyone? Take us.
Yeah. You see, as I always say, social norms or values is hereditary. It's something people inherited either from their father or their grandfather. It's also what environment teaches them to operate. In order to solve this, what I always suggest is that we should define communication. Most people do not, the way we communicate to the elders, the way we communicate to the young people varies. There are communication mechanisms you will use for a young person, an elderly person will not catch it. So both bottom to top up approach, we need to define what kind of communication do we need to sell out to the people to say these norms are not helpful, they are disruptive, and you can be a victim. Therefore, while you pretend that it is all well, it may be your daughter, it may be your auntie. What will you do? So when people begin to feel it direct, then they understand what we are talking about. What I normally tell my male friend about issue of gender or rape, I will tell them when they are laughing, when we are discussing it, I will ask them, have you ever tried to zip your trouser and it hang you on the tip of your private part? If you tell an average boy that have suffered it, he will scream. He will tell you, don't go there. Any man that have suffered it will tell you, don't even go there at all. I will tell them, that is what the woman is telling you. That is the pain they go through. That thing you don't want it to happen again. That is what they are asking you not to repeat. So, by so doing, the communication sinks immediately. So it doesn't say, I don't understand what they are talking about. It's not a woman thing. I said, that's what you're feeling. So if we're able to design communication, then I also identify champions. Who are these champions? Because most times the people we think are champions are necessarily not the champions we are looking for. So if we're able to identify champions within communities who can be able to communicate this in a language of that particular community will appreciate, it will go a long way to say, if my champion or role model or those people who identify as directors of our ways or our culture could be able to do A, B, C, D, then we'll begin to change it. And also share success stories from other people who have applied it and what they have already achieved. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Lola?
I think I can speak to two things that we're doing. We believe that children have a role to play in their protection, right? And so we also know that, as I said, we're all products of our socialization. So in terms of catching them young, how do we reorientate the mindsets of these our young children? We introduced a curriculum. For the boys, it's referred to as King's Club, and for the girls, it's Queen's Club. And basically, over a period of 6 weeks, we have female mentors and male mentors that engage boys and girls on this curriculum that talks about sexual and reproductive rights, sexual and gender-based violence, transitioning from boy to man. Mrs. Udukoya is one of our mentors, our Queen's Club mentors. And the impact has been quite remarkable. Aside from, and I feel this is one issue that we always struggle with, sustainability. It's good for you to start something, But then how do you sustain it? So this is not just to engage the children. At the end of the 6 weeks, we actually have a proper ceremony, and then we now set up the club. So you know the way you have Red Cross or Brownies, you now have these clubs in these selected schools. And at the moment, we're actually doing monitoring and evaluation. And we have clubs that started with 10 girls, and now they have 40 new members. And if you ask these girls, like, why did you join this club? They say things like, we saw the way this girl has changed. Something has changed. Something is different. She's more confident. She's more aware of who she is. There was a particular guy that said, a young boy that said, his friend, he noticed the difference in the way he walks. Like his head is high. He's walking, you know? And these are ways we can change social norms. And truly, it starts from, from that level. In terms of religious institutions and marriage as an institution, we've also found that at least 60% of survivors of domestic violence saw the signs during courtship. They knew that this person is violent, but perhaps they felt that God will use me to change that person, or perhaps that for whatever reason they still went into the union. How can we leverage on these institutions that are already in existence, the religious institutions, the registries, the marriage registries? Is it possible for us to include or introduce compulsory premarital counseling, for instance, as a prerequisite for the church or the mosque or for the registrar of marriage to join this intending couple? And if you do not attend these counseling sessions, is it possible for the registrar of marriage to withhold the license and make you compulsorily attend these sessions? So that's what we did. We introduced it last year. And we've also been getting good mileage on it. Just to round up, I find that we want a change immediately. Perhaps it's because of our culture. If you want to cook something, you just put it in the microwave, 2 minutes, and it's done. But these are, as Mr. David said, these are norms that have been passed on from generation to generation. It's going to take a while for us to change these narratives and these norms. But I think the best time to start is now.
Thank you very much. I'll come back to you, Manuela, but I thought there might be questions from the floor. We've talked for like at least 30 minutes from this side. Can we take 2, 3 questions maximum? Who is one? Do we have a mic on the floor? Sir, you're 1, 2, and I saw a hand there, 3. No. Comments, okay, 4. So 3 questions and 1 comment. Let's start with you, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much. My name is Marcel Mbamalo. I work for New Start Publications Limited. I must say thank you to Ford for a well choreographed session, especially for bringing a Lagos State representative here. I was at one of the sessions there, education sector, a panel for education, and a whole lot was being discussed. And we never had one single representative from government in that panel. So it's good you're here. And I so much relate to what you said about the attitude, part of the violence, gender violence issues that we have in terms of, especially when it has to do with rape, it has to do with general violence against women. They are products of what society, what we experience, the environment where we grew up, our parents, our environment, our society, and the rest. And I think that to address this, we need to have a holistic approach. David talked about communication, and that brings the question of media. I don't know to what extent, we are going to change all this if the media is not in the center of it all. And again, in education curriculum, is there a way maybe these organizations represented here can think of leading the process of influencing our curriculum to to catch these children young when they are at that stage of primary education, secondary. I think that it's doable if we begin to rethink our education curriculum and curricula, generally speaking, and begin to bring up issues of gender violence, issues of gender awareness, and the fact that, as David said, that it's not just about the female, it can happen to anyone. Pardon me just a second, let me explain something that happened just a year ago, where I live here in Lagos, in Ajawi State area of Lagos. I saw a lady, a very young lady, maybe 18, pregnant, heavily pregnant. And I have a friend in Lagos State, one of the Lagos State agencies that handle issues of violence. So I saw begging money, and very obviously she got pregnant. Somebody would have, all these area boys would have gotten her pregnant. And you see her in that squalor, the way she was, very heavy. Perhaps in a week or so she would deliver. So I felt bad, and I made a call. And the lady I called said, okay, I should do anything I could do to bring her. But the lady couldn't. I just got a few of my friends, a lady also involved, and we tried to force her to take her to somewhere and see how we can help to the official. But in the process, as we were about to leave, I saw a lady maybe in her 40s, come out of the car, pounced on a man. If you see the way, and just handled the man, dragged on the floor, did so many things like that. I said, oh, that's another case of, so there's a flip side. So for us to have our main folk understand this, let's begin to educate them, to tell them that it's not just women, it could happen to anybody. So we are all victims. So let's work to ensure that this is not. So two things: curriculum, education, that's curriculum, and then media. And then perhaps the third one would be legal representation. To what extent? You talked about 300 cases in a month. How many of these are driven to a conclusion in terms of prosecution and all of those? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll take all the questions, and then if you have any response. The second, please. Please, just the question. We have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Olabisi. I'm a project consultant. Okay, so I have two questions. So my first question is about disability. And I want to ask, is there like some specific disabilities that are minor and some are major? And the reason I'm asking is because one of the companies that I consult for recently hired someone with speech disability, like she stammers. But even herself hasn't really she doesn't really see it. She sees it as not a big deal. But over time, it has kind of like affected her productivity at work and everything like that. But to her, it's not a big deal. It's not, she doesn't really see it as disability. So what are the practical things to be able to do to ensure that when hiring or maybe during work, someone tries to ensure that it puts that kind of person in a certain field and not try to relegate that person. My second question is also around gender-based violence. What would someone do in the case of gender-based violence for a female, but it's quite elderly? Like, church has been involved, community has been involved, but the violence keeps going
GBV
on and
for the aged.
Yes,
when GBV
exactly.
happens to the aged. The third question, please. Okay. Thank you. So either of you can take one of each of the three questions.
Okay, thank you. So mine is not so much a question. It's a comment, but maybe there's a question embedded there. It's really to align, and I think it aligns also with what the first speaker has said. My name is Fabio Gumeko. I'm the outgoing executive director of a women's organization, Women in Successful Careers. So I agree with early socialization, that is clearly a problem and where we can start. And I'd be interested in hearing more about the work of the clubs for example, and how that can be scaled. Obviously, collaboration is key. There are many people working in the sector, and how one can really collaborate, because I think the early years are really important in terms of sort of cracking that socialization. Of course, home and society have a part to play, but I think cracking it in the schools is a good place to start. And then the second one is communication, which the first speaker had alluded to. I think that GBV is clearly a national emergency. And post-COVID, particularly in 2020, it became a national emergency. But I think it sort of cooled off and died down, and people have moved on. And I think keeping it on the agenda is very important and well placed in a conference, I mean, in a setting like this. So keeping it on the agenda, I think, is very important. And one of those ways is communication. Finding how to make it, sort of almost last mile communication, radio programs across languages, across radio channels. So yeah, media, as he said, but really keeping it on the forefront and on the agenda so that it doesn't sort of die off because it's no longer.
Thank you so much. I think you had a comment too, so the last comment. Thank you. And then 1 minute to respond so that we can round up.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Tinuke Udukoya, and my comment is simple, that we need to look at it from a multi-sectoral approach and to ensure that we're pushing the information out, seeing GBV as a social disruptor. Our entire community, our entire nation, part of the chaos that we see is the effect of violence, the effect of domestic violence, the effect of what it does to the psyche and to the mindset. And also to let people understand the fact that it's a function of the power over, and that a lot of things that we condone and we make excuses for, you wouldn't do it if you didn't have some certain powers over one person or the other. And it doesn't matter which of the sexes, because work that we are doing, for instance, with Letty shows that more and more men are actually now survivors of GBV. Like you said, shame, stigma, they're not speaking out. Then the issue of the religious leaders. I mean, Nigeria is a very religious society, and the socialization that we have has also impacted on them. So they struggle, and they tend to see this thing as people wanting women to be over them or above them or stronger than them. And that's not the narrative. I think that at this point, one core or key government institution is the National Orientation Agency. We need to begin to script Nigerians. We need to begin to script our children. We need to begin to tell a narrative that makes violence of any form a no-no.
Thank you very much. So our panelists, 1 minute each. We have less than 5
so
minutes.
I think for me, we cannot overemphasize the importance of early education. If you could introduce etiquettes behaviors into our curriculum. But my worry about it is who will teach it, because most of the adults, the teachers who are supposed to be teaching it, actually perpetrators, and they themselves, I don't know, I think I should just wrap it there. Thank you.
I want you to respond to the question on disability.
Yeah. There is no disability that is small. There is no one that is minor. It depends on the availability of resources to manage it. When I lost my 2 hands, people said that my own is finished. But very few understood that I don't have hands when I entered here, because there is a remedy or a prosthesis which I'm using to hold this mic. So when people see me, they say, wow. I don't know if you understand. But I will tell you, I was trying to learn computer, and I went to a very, prominent computer school in Yaba, and I asked them I want to learn computer. And they told me that I should go, that they can't teach me computer. But I later use computer without a prosthesis. I use it, and I use it to work. It all depends on what is available for you to be treated or integrated back to the society. The challenge we have is that there is no rehabilitation, and there is no integration. So the individual is traumatized, the family is abused, the state do not do anything about it. At the end of the day, you see the person begging on the street. But every organization should try to include disability data to ask newly employed, do you have disability? If it's speech impairment, can it hinder you? To what extent? But it should not serve as a barrier to delete individual or discriminate. Because why people with disability tend to say it doesn't matter is because they are afraid they will be sacked. They are afraid they will lose their job. The organization they came to work have no disability policy. So where there is no disability policy, where there is no disability law protecting any individual, it becomes an issue. So you know, or you see him or her, that she has disability. But if you ask her, can this thing stop me? She said, no, it can't stop me. And she keep on pushing. So awareness creation, non-discrimination by reason of disability in the workplace will help such individual. You don't need to remove him or her from the beat she likes to work on. If she wants to be a lawyer or she wants to go to the court because she's a samurai, you don't tell her not to go. She can address the judge. Exactly. If she says she wants to be an MC, entertaining people and speaking to them, allow her. At the end of the day, the society will understand that there is equal opportunity. Thank you so much.
Ola, please swap me.
Okay, the early GBV for the aged. So yes, we do have such cases. Just last year, we handled a lady that was 68. She had been married for 40 years. And that lady, it was her children that actually came to the office to report, because this is what they had seen for the better part of their childhood. And they felt that the last incident that occurred, the man allegedly pushed her, and in the process of her falling, she hit her head. So she went into coma and all of that. So the children were really scared, you know. But the truth of the matter is that you cannot force a survivor out of a violent relationship. The survivor most times has to take a decision for themselves. If you take a decision for the survivor, there's a very high likelihood that the survivor will go back to the place of abuse. So what we need to do is focus our attention on ensuring that this survivor, this 69-year-old woman, is able to receive psychosocial support, receive therapy. Let her know that she deserves better, you know, and let her know that there are support services that exist. Support service doesn't necessarily need to end up in the police station or in court. You can deploy ADR. You can say, okay, be separated. There are so many things that can be put in place to address that scenario. So yes, so I encourage that the family members, you know, should not give up. I'm saying it again, people are dying as a result of domestic violence. They should, even if she doesn't want to speak to government or she doesn't want to go to the police, they can refer her to a counselor just to debrief, get information so that she takes an informed decision and not one that is based on emotions.
Thank you very much. Please, a round of applause for our panelists. We're right on the hour. Thank you very much. I think the summary or the conclusion of the whole thing is that it's a collective responsibility. And we need to keep talking about this. And you're right, media has a role to play. At the Ford Foundation, we actually have a lot of work that we do with the Premium Time Center for Citizens Engagement and Justice. So many organizations that we support to do even capacity building for reporters, investigative journalists, and the rest of them to be able to talk about these issues and change the narrative. You said something, instead of Ada was raped, it should be Ade raped Ada. You know, and it's one day at a time. Cracking social norms change will not be, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. We need to take our time. We need to ensure that we keep the conversations running. We need to make sure that in settings like this, we infuse some of these conversations and not make it something that is just for women's rights organizations or disability-focused organizations or DSVRT to talk about. Wherever we have the space and the time, we must continue to bring this issue to the front burner like you mentioned. I want to thank you for being an engaging audience. Thank you very much. And thank God it's Friday.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.